For regular viewers of John Cullen Investigates, today is a special treat, John. You have got literally a breakthrough to share with us. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm excited about what we have to share with the audience. And we have a number of major breaks, and we're also going to cover something that's been happening over the weekend that's been blowing up on Twitter and in the news and in the mainstream.
Yeah.
And we're going to address all of it. So,
Yeah. I think people know what you're talking about is this information that came out from the CDC that only 6% of recorded deaths had no other comorbidities. Only 6% of the reported coronavirus deaths reported coronavirus exclusively. Everybody else had respiratory failures and pneumonia and influenza and all these other things. I actually, just before we went live here, I saw a very informative YouTube video from an MD who explained that it's not accurate to say that that means only 6% of the people died just from coronavirus. He explained that some of these comorbidities in the 94% were fatal due to coronavirus. So it sort of went a bit to that classic saying that there are lies, damn lies,
that's what we're going to look at.
Statistics. But the thing that you've got today, John, that's amazing is almost a fingerprint. It's got nothing to do with statistics. It's got to do with something that you brought to our attention quite a while ago. And for people who are seeing you for the first time, John, I think it's important that they realize that you and I are doing a show every Fridays, a sponsor-exclusive show on subscribestar.com/IamJohnCullen, patreon.com/IamJohnCullen, and Subscribestar and Patreon/crowdsourcethetruth. You've also got a tremendous YouTube channel. You've been really working hard, doing fantastic research since you and I met in the Vegas investigation. People can watch our simulcasts on the John E. Hoover YouTube channel, and if you're not yet subscribed over there, check it out for sure. You're not going to want to miss any of this stuff. John, why don't we get right into what you've prepared for us this morning?
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. So we've got a presentation put together. We're going to step through it rather quickly because this is all kind of breaking news. So we're breaking this presentation into three sections. The title is The Depletion of Susceptibles, the Double Hump, and Comorbidity. And what we're going to do in the show is look at the data. So unlike a lot of the mainstream media that are interpreting what's false, what's not false, what's true, we're just going to look at the data, and you and the audience will draw your own conclusions, right? I don't necessarily have a conclusion. We're just going to look at how does the data fall into certain buckets. That's it. And then everybody in the audience will draw their own conclusion, right? So basically, we're fact-checking some of the things that have happened in the news over the weekend. So why don't we step into it? We'll go into the first issue that came up since our show on Friday.
Yeah.
So step one is, where do we stand right now? What's happening with daily reported deaths? I have said repeatedly that what matters most is deaths, not cases, not hospital beds, not testing. What matters is, are people dying? And we reported back on the 4th of July or 3rd of July that we had decreasing deaths for a matter of months. And then we had a second wave, a second spike. But now it's been going down for weeks in the United States. And there is a term for this. And I only learned this term over the weekend. And it's a very scientific term. It's very specific. And we're going to explore that. But we have reached this point. And as I was researching that, I discovered a whole bunch of new things over the weekend that I got so excited about. And then, like I often say to you, I work with my head down. I don't really look at what's going on. But when I pick my head up over the weekend, I see the president is retweeting this thing about comorbidity and whatever. And it's almost like it was a parallel track to what I had discovered on Saturday. And so as that was happening, I was doing something in parallel, and wow, they converged. All right. So that's what we're going to look at in this show. And
Yeah.
that's why this show is a special episode. And I think we should also probably tell the audience that usually we go to Patreon and Subscribestar, but this is special information. You want to talk a little bit about that and maybe explain why I'm in a hat and sunglasses to people who are watching for the first time?
People do ask that almost every time. And,
Yeah.
John has revealed a lot of information that's unpopular with certain people who perhaps don't like alternative points of view. John is the guy who discovered blinking lights in the sky surrounding the Mandalay Bay and the hotels in Las Vegas on October 1st, 2017. No radar signature, but after accumulating police body camera footage, countless witness cell phone videos, it's just really such an accumulation of evidence, it's hard to deny. John has triangulated the location of these hovering lights. The reason I bring it up is because it becomes what's known as prima facie evidence. People always say, oh, you don't have proof, you don't have proof. I don't like to use the word proof because it's a standard that, depending on what we're looking at, changes. Proof in a mathematical equation is different than proof in a court of law in the United States, civil, criminal, Canada, England, different countries. They all have different standards of proof. But what we're presenting here is evidence. And as John said, allowing viewers to draw their own conclusions. John, YouTube and some of the various social media platforms have been changing their terms of service lately, where I don't have the wording in front of me, but basically questioning the World Health Organization or public health information is grounds for getting a smackdown from a lot of these social media things. But John, what about just looking at their own data and making videos about their information? Are we questioning it or just talking about it?
No. So what we're doing here is we're simply reporting it. And because I'm a data specialist, right? This is my career, my past career. I am able to access the data and allow for visualization of the data. I'm just putting it into spreadsheets and then charting it. But it allows for us to look at a lot of numbers for a country with over 300 million people and look for patterns. And again, I'm not telling anybody what to think, and I may not even tell you what I think. I don't even know if I know what I think, but I'm looking for patterns in numbers. That's what I'm looking for. And so that's it. That's all we're doing here. So in some of the comments, some people have said, I wish Cullen would hurry the hell up and get to the point, because sometimes he drags these stories out forever. And I understand that. And I want to address that up front, because in this show, I'm going to give you guys something that's called bluff. If any of you are military officers and trained at West Point, you know what bluff is. Bluff is taught at West Point, and it's also a technique that's used at Amazon.com. So if you work at Amazon, you know what bluff is. Bluff, B-L-U-F, is bottom line up front. It means if we're going to have a meeting and it's your meeting and you're running the meeting, imagine Jeff Bezos is sitting in your meeting. What is the bottom line of your presentation? And then if he's got 12 more minutes, he'll stay for the supporting information, right? The issue is when I drop a bottom line up front on you guys, the delta between where we are, the story you've been told, the narrative, and what the evidence presents is so dramatic that if I just drop, here, I'm going to give you an example. All right, I'm going to drop a bottom line up front for those of you who are not familiar with any of my Las Vegas research. For 2.5 years before coronavirus broke out, I was researching the Las Vegas shooting that took place October 1st, 2017. If you are not familiar with any of my research and you met me at a cocktail party and you introduced me and said, hey, this is my friend Jeff Bezos, tell Jeff bottom line up front what happened in Vegas.
You wouldn't believe it.
No, and I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it out loud so that for those of you who are unfamiliar versus those of you who know the backstory, you'll see how absurd it sounds, right? So if you
Yeah.
don't know the backstory, the bottom line up front on what happened in Vegas is that a guy named Maiteb bin Abdullah and Mohammed bin Nayef were sponsored by Adnan Khashoggi to kill a guy named Khalid bin Salman and a guy named Mohammed bin Salman. And that's what happened. All right. So a lot of the videos that I made private because they had false positives in them. And so if the video has too many false positives, I would pull it.
Right. But there's still a ton of videos in here that share the evidence and information that people can go through.
And they're still relevant. Yeah.
Video
Absolutely.
footage from the Las Vegas Metro Police body cameras and lots of stuff that came about months and even years after people had stopped looking at a lot of this evidence. And John, really, this is the method of the mainstream news. They have a story they want everybody to understand or believe. They spend a lot of time up front hammering that story in, like coronavirus is this, it's that, it's the other thing. Stephen Paddock shot, Lee Harvey Oswald shot, whatever it is. They hammer that into people's heads so that really it's difficult for people to absorb or believe any alternative information that comes along, no matter how evidence-based it might be. But let's get right into what you've got here on your latest discovery, because I don't know that I've even fully absorbed it yet. It's one of these things that you're sort of in shock, but it's... Yeah. Let's just get to it.
And this is like a triple play. So if you've never seen a triple play in baseball, you're about to see a triple play in investigative journalism. So here's what happened. We've been talking about the double hump on this show for some time. And the double hump is a term that I just gave the fact that the coronavirus outbreak peaked back in April. And then around the 4th of July, we thought it was going away. And then it came back, right? And so we gave this shape of the term the double hump because it came, we had a peak, it looked like it was going away, and then it came back. And the irony was that the same thing was happening with influenza. So we've been exploring that for weeks now, all right? Let's go to the next page in the deck, bottom line up front. The next stage of today's show, part 2, is going to talk about comorbidity. And this gets into the president's tweet. We're going to talk about dying with coronavirus versus dying from coronavirus. And what we're going to do is go to the CDC's website, and we're going to download the data, and we're going to put it in the chart. We're going to see, what does it say? And then you guys will decide what's what. Right? We're just going to put it into chunks is all we're going to do. And then part 3, we're going to look at the tweet that Twitter took down, that the Washington Post has a story about right now that the president is retweeting. So the president retweeted this. For those of you who don't know, the president retweeted this tweet. And this tweet from this woman named Mel Q, with a little frog or lizard, whatever the hell that is, was a link to the CDC site. Now you have the link to this site. So we're going to go right to it. And the media seems to have lost their mind over this tweet.
Yeah.
And all right. And the president retweeted it. And Twitter took it down. So when you talk about censorship and the censorship that you and I have been experiencing, and you experience 10 times what I mean, you've got the legal battles and all that stuff. Me, they just take my videos down and I just pluck them off the tree and I don't even know what's happening. It's like, what do you mean that one's gone? So, but you know, they throw rocks and bricks at metaphorically, right? You're just a constant target, and it's sad. But the net of it is we go to the CDC and we get the data, right? So that's what we're going to do in the show is we're going to get the actual data from the CDC. There's no controversy here. There's no conspiracy. There's no theory. We're just looking at their data and sticking in the chart. So let's go to the next slide of my deck, and I'll show you how this comes together.
Yeah, I think they were very upset that Mel Q likes QAnon.
Yeah, and again, that to me, that's like prosecuting somebody for their religious beliefs, or you know that she wears crystals around her neck and believes in energy, or she believes in energy and or yoga, and again, this is ad hominem, right? When the data is legit, you go ad hominem and you attack the person and you attack the person's integrity. That's why I use a nom de plume and I'm anonymous. I don't want people attacking me. I want people to look at the data. I want people to look at the evidence. This isn't about me. I'm irrelevant here. Well, I have the skills to get the data. You guys know I've worked at Oracle, right? I know data and I know how to get it and I know how to make it look in a way that you can understand it better, right? And I've spent a lifetime doing that. So Zero Hedge covered this, Gateway Pundit covered it, now the Washington Post covered it. So this is now mainstream media that the president tweeted it, Twitter took it down, and the media is saying that it was misleading, that there's something about this that's nefarious about this post, right? So we're going to look at the data straight from the CDC and see, all right, what's all the hullabaloo about? Why is Twitter losing their mind? The other thing that I just find fascinating is that, again, we've talked about how the median age at Twitter is 29 or 30, meaning half the company is between 21 and 29 years old, right? So if half the company is between 21 and 29 years old and they're making these decisions and saying, no, we know more, we know better than the President of the United States of America.
Yeah.
And we're going to edit him. We're going to edit what he says. I find this stunning because I guarantee you there aren't 12 70-somethings with a bunch of life experience saying, you know what, this is really dangerous to society and we got to take this down. That's not what's happening here. There's a bunch of self-righteous 20-somethings who are making these decisions and thinking they know better than the President of the United States. All right, so for those of you who are not familiar, I was one of the pioneers of the software that created this map. And the first thing I said when I saw this map, and you said to me, this is not just some straight up virus. I thought we were looking at a bat soup problem, right? I was telling you about the wet markets, right? And I was lamenting the fact that I didn't take you to the wet market to buy fish and cook for you because I shop at the wet market all the time. Yeah. And then you said to me, no. This is not that. This something nefarious is going on here. And when I took one look at this thing, I said, well, wait a second. This is my software. So for those of you who don't know, the software is built with a tool from a company called ESRI in Redlands, California. I set this thing up with Oracle so that the data and the maps work together. So this is my baby. This is like my first car.
So a database, an Oracle database drives the visuals that people see on the map. The map basically has got like buckets that data goes into, and that data drives graphics on the map, right?
Mm-hmm. And that bucket is simply a zip code. That's all it is. So the zip code that's associated with the death, the zip code that's associated with the test, that's what's driving the map. And all the data, all the numbers, and all the words are in an Oracle database behind the scenes. So as an expert in this software, the first thing I noticed was everything was red and that it was built to panic the public. The second thing I noticed was where it came from, which is the Mike Bloomberg School of Health at Johns Hopkins University. Let me repeat that. This comes from the Mike Bloomberg School of Health at Johns Hopkins University. And if I remember correctly, Mike Bloomberg was running for president recently, spent $1 billion and backed out of the race.
Didn't he vow to spend all of his money to destroy Trump?
I wasn't sure if he said that. I thought I heard him say that, or I wasn't sure. But again, it's anecdotal. I thought I heard him say that too, that he was going to put his resources behind it. Yeah. I didn't think it might manifest itself this way, and I'm not saying it has, but just coincidentally, this red map that had Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos in red when nobody was dead comes from the Mike Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins University. And for those of you who think that's hyperbole,
John. He said he was only going to spend all the money he had left over after the gay ice cream budget was exhausted.
Yeah, I don't know this story, but I love ice cream, but I'm going to leave it at that. Tell you what, can you do me a favor? Can you pull up the Mike Bloomberg School of Health at Johns Hopkins so people don't think this is hyperbole? This is real. It's the Mike Bloomberg School of Health at Johns Hopkins University. School of Public Health, I think. Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. Hopkins names Public Health School for Mike Bloomberg. What year was that?
April 23rd, 2001.
April of 2001. Interesting. April of 2001. I'll have to tell a story on Patreon one night. It's a lascivious story about me and Bill Gates and sharing a bed. Yeah, I'll tell you that on Patreon. In April,
okay, let's get back to the data.
In April of 2001. I'll tell you that. So I told you I had stories about Bill Gates. So that's one of my 3 stories with Bill Gates is in April of 2001.
To the data.
We'll get there. Yeah, we'll get there later. All right. So what is the likelihood that 2 unrelated species will experience population explosions at the same time twice in a 6-month window was a question that we asked on the show a week or 2 ago on the show. And we were looking at the curve for coronavirus and how it exactly matched the death count for influenza this season. So the P&I deaths, the blue, was our influenza outbreak in the United States. And the fact that both influenza and coronavirus had that second peak seemed bizarre because they're not the same. Coronavirus and influenza are completely separate species in the virus kingdom, right? That's why I was using 2 different birds in the show a week or 3 ago, where we were comparing them and saying coronavirus and influenza are totally different. They have different shapes. They've got, they're different branches of the virus world, like a human and a monkey kind of a thing. Yeah, we're both simians or whatever, but, different branches. So why would they both have this double peak? And why would the double peaks kind of line up so synchronously? And that's what we were asking on the show. All right, so let's go to the next slide, and I'll explain where this goes. We've been asking this peak concept, right, that we see in the COVID-19 outbreak. Now go to the next slide. Compare it to H1n1 on the next slide. We go one more page. All right, this is influenza. So we got peak, and peak, right? How do you explain that? Is this a coincidence? Right, and we've been asking.
Well, a lot of people asked last week, is this a characteristic of influenza? Have you gone back and looked at previous years? And you did, and it was not.
I did, and I put that in the appendix. It's all the way at the end of the presentation. So when we wrap up the show, we'll look at that as we're wrapping up. But yes, I went back and looked at all the other years to see, do we have any of these double humps before? And the answer is no, we didn't. So this is a strange behavior. And I have the charts, and we'll show those to you later. I don't want to go too sidetracked on this, but the point is this has been on your mind. It's been on my mind. The audience is wondering what the hell's going on here. All right, so then the question becomes, might this be some sort of a thumbprint of a given virus? In other words, hypothetically speaking, we asked on the show, are we seeing the behavior of 2 viruses or not? Is this the behavior of a particular virus? Now, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to pose the question hypothetically and just put that out on the table. I don't know, right? So let's go to the next slide. All right. Over the weekend, after you and I did our show on Friday, I was watching a TED Talk from Thessalonica, Greece, from 2016. So I'm watching a 4-year-old TED Talk from Thessalonica, Greece on epidemiology. This is how I spend my weekends. Okay. And the talk is about depletion of susceptibles. And depletion of susceptibles is a technical term for an outbreak, right? For an epidemic. And an epidemic reaches a certain point all the time called the depletion of susceptibles. And it's when the people who are susceptible to the virus have either succumbed to it and died or got sick and recovered. And the rest of the people who are not susceptible to it for whatever reason haven't gotten it and aren't going to get it.
Right.
And that's called depletion of susceptibles.
Medical term, not your term.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a medical or epidemiological. All right, so as I'm studying this, the woman in the TED Talk is putting this chart up on the wall behind her in the presentation. And I get goosebumps. She's showing the Spanish flu from 1918. And this is just part of her talk, talking about depletion of susceptibles, right? So I'm watching the depletion of susceptibles presentation.
Right.
To document that I believe that's where we are in this outbreak, right? I think we have achieved depletion of susceptibles with the second peak, right? Mm-hmm. And she puts this slide up from 1918 that's written with a feather by candlelight. Thank you, Joe Rogan, for that line. It's one of your best lines, Joe. Written by feather by candlelight, right? This is from 1918, and this is in her presentation. And I about fell out of my chair. This is the Spanish flu outbreak that killed 50 million people in 1918, 1919. And what do we see? Okay. New York, London, Paris, Berlin. Let's go to the next slide. What jumps out at me?
The double hump.
The double hump. Back in 1918, somebody on a piece of parchment made a graph of the deaths in London. And we look and we see the double hump. All right, so now we got to give a tip of the hat to old man Cullen. Old man Cullen sees this. I sent this to him. And he says to me, how much time is there between those two peaks? And I said, oh, man, that's a good question. So we measure the time between the peaks.
100 days.
Just about 100 days, give or take, right? So I would say plus or minus 10 days, it's 100 days, right?
3
so
months.
It could be 90. Yeah, it could be 96. It could be 104. All right.
Boom.
And I lay coronavirus on top, and the peak in April and the peak in August, they're almost identical 100 years later. All right. So I see this and I'm falling out of my chair. This is amazing. So I get all excited, right? So then I go back to dig into the coronavirus mortality data that we've been using every week. Same stuff every week, right? So I go into the site.
But wait a second. Let me pause you for a second, John, because there might be people watching right now who are not familiar with the article that was released. Was it Science Magazine? Reviving the Spanish flu pandemic.
Yep.
It was released by
2005.
NIH, Resurrecting the Spanish Flu. So, I mean, this is particularly astounding to look at, given the knowledge that it was publicly announced by the NIH that they were doing this. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 to 1919, they basically brought it back.
So it says that since 1995, they've been piecing together the DNA of Spanish flu.
Why would they do that?
Because they didn't watch Jurassic Park or they didn't read the book, right? The whole point of Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park is just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because we have the technology to recreate Tyrannosaurus Rex doesn't mean that the Bronx Zoo should start doing that.
Right.
Right? I mean, it's not a good idea.
They
right?
didn't see the movie.
Right. So nor is resurrecting the deadliest virus on Earth. All right. So the H1n1 Spanish flu, according to Bill Gates, killed 33,333,333 people.
Right.
Okay. Actually, there was a
something close to
360.
that.
There was a 365. There was a
Yeah.
365 in the middle, meaning every day, all of this is all part of the game. Okay. So this, but seriously, the number is between 30 and 50 million people died in 1918, 1919. And as you research the Spanish flu, now more and more people are saying that that is really what ended World War One. It wasn't the combat, it was the Spanish flu, and it wiped everybody out. And Spain was not engaged in the war. So Spain was talking about the flu, and everybody thought it was them because nobody else was talking about it. All right, let's talk about dying with coronavirus versus dying from coronavirus. I'm digging into the data. Let's go to the next page. I go to the same site we always go to get our coronavirus data. All right. This is where my background, and this is going to sound strange again, but this is where my background in magic comes back to play. They've been hiding this in plain sight. And there's a trick that you can find on the internet. I think it's called greatcardtrick.com or onlinecardtrick.com. And it's, you think of a card, you look at a card, and then you hit the button. Next thing you know, they figured out your card or something like that. And it's online. They did this at the CDC. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. There's something on the screen here that when you hit the download data button to download the table, that column's missing. Okay, let me repeat that. There is a column of data here that they've been showing us that when I hit the download data button, that data doesn't come with the download. That column is missing like it wasn't ever there. And that column is a really important column as it pertains to our research here at Crowdsource the Truth, right? Yes. Now, normally, this is the type of stuff that we do at Patreon and Subscribestar, right? So by now we'd be over at patreon.com at Crowdsource the Truth or patreon.com. I am John Cullen. And for those of you who are subscribers and patrons, you guys make this stuff possible. So I'm incredibly grateful. If it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be able to do this. I wouldn't, we wouldn't know what you're about to see here. The other thing I want to point out to the audience is if I was working at McKinsey or Bain or Boston Group,
okay, you'd be shot by now.
No. What you're about to see would cost about $1.8 million, $2.2 million. All right. This is a research brief of what's happening with this outbreak that Stratfor doesn't have, Brookings doesn't have. And if they did, and you wanted to see this research, this would be about $1.8 million, $2.2 million for what you're about to see. Okay. And that's not an exaggeration. All right. On the page that we have been downloading the data, the CDC has been showing us a very important number. And that number allows me to do something called derive values. And we're going to use some derived values to do something that you're not going to see at the Washington Post. You're not going to see on CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN. You're not going to see it. All right. So this is exclusive. All right. What was the CDC showing us the whole time right in front of our face, but it's not in the data when I hit the download button, is in red. The number in green is the number they're reporting. So the number on the left side of the screen, 167, is all deaths involving COVID. Now, the number on the Johns Hopkins map is bigger than that. Okay, yeah. Johns Hopkins is, they are factoring in some other stuff. But these numbers here, these are deaths. This is death certificate stuff, okay? So 167,558 is the number the CDC is reporting. Okay, you're on the CDC website, right?
Which link was it that weekly?
Up on top. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. You're in my deck. But yes, this is on the CDC website. And this is August 28th. So this is Friday. Or updated Friday.
I think I've got it here. Updated September 1st. This is it, right?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now look at the column over to the right that I highlighted.
Deaths involving pneumonia.
All right, go to my deck where I circled it, right?
Yep.
And read what that says, and take a minute to take in the thing in red. So
It says
read what that
deaths
column heading is.
involving COVID-19 and pneumonia, excluding influenza. So they're basically saying right here in the United States, out of 167,558 total deaths that involved COVID-19, and this speaks directly to that 6% thing and the presentation I saw from the medical doctor this morning, that it doesn't mean that 6% of this total is the actual number. The revelation that you're bringing to us is that the deaths involving COVID-19 out of these 167,558, the ones that don't include influenza are 74,236, some 93,000 deaths that are basically attributed to influenza.
Thank you. Your perception is spot on. All right, so let's read this column heading again with the audience, because the cognitive dissonance here is going to be upsetting. All right, so this is a major breakthrough. This is a cleave in the number. We are about to cut the number down the center, effect almost, right? So this is a cleave. And what that means is the cognitive dissonance is going to be high, meaning it's almost nauseating to look at this. Deaths involving coronavirus, but there's no influenza, is 74,000.
Yeah.
The number that you just mentioned is called a derived value. Now, you did that in your head. But can you explain to the audience, how did you come up with that number? You came up with that number by taking
all
the total
deaths.
number, the total number of deaths that involve COVID, and then you subtracted the number of people that don't have influenza, and now you're going to come up with a number of people that died that had COVID-19 and also had influenza. Now, that's called a derived value, and that's a number that's not in the table. It's not being provided by the CDC, but that is deductive reasoning. So that's a number that you can say with 100% certainty. So this is deductive reasoning versus inductive, and we've talked about that here as well. So deductive reasoning is, I can say with certainty 167,558 people have died according to the CDC. According to the CDC, 74,236 of those people did not have influenza. Well, that means 93,000, or whatever the number works out to be,
322
people who have been reported by Johns Hopkins as having died of coronavirus also have influenza, according to the CDC. Now, this is a derived value. They're not giving you that column that says deaths involving, they're not providing that number, but you just did the math, right?
Yeah.
That is deductive reasoning. That is a certainty, because it's either including or you either have it or you don't have it, right? So now we're going to chart the CDC's numbers very simply, right? So we go to the CDC Mortality database and we look at coronavirus deaths with influenza, coronavirus deaths that don't have influenza. So they told us 74,000 people do not have influenza with the coronavirus. And then you just did the math and said, well, the 93,000 do.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Well, that kind of changes everything. If 93,000 people who have died had both coronavirus and H1n1 and pneumonia, because it's pneumonia that's going to kill them, right? The pneumonia goes into the cytokine storm and they drown, basically. So what do you guys think? Do these 93,000 deaths that, I mean, the fact that the Johns Hopkins map doesn't show you that there's a difference here,
Well,
right?
it's the fact that it's not talking about influenza, which is clearly a larger problem. I think that the true story would be, hey, there's an influenza outbreak that's being aggravated by a novel virus that when the two are combined, the patient seems extremely susceptible to death.
When the two are combined, you got 93,000 dead. Right.
Right.
When the two are combined, you got 93,000 dead, which is more than any influenza season that we've had in recent memory, according to the CDC, not according to what we see, but according to CDC's reports. That alone would be more than any influenza season we've ever had. Right. So, like you said, coronavirus plus influenza, 93,000 people. Right. So now, what if we then said, well, let's separate these populations a little bit. Let's take the 74,000 people with coronavirus that did not have influenza, and let's look at just the influenza P&I reporting right now. How many people have influenza or have died, right, in the United States from P&I? So this comes from the CDC's P&I mortality database. So I'm comparing two different things here. So this is comparing two different diseases. I'm comparing the influenza outbreak with a portion of the coronavirus outbreak, the population that does not have influenza is in the United States. So these are deaths of people of coronavirus, right? What does the legend say at the bottom? Deaths involving COVID-19 and pneumonia, excluding influenza, and I give you the death code, right? So the death code is from the Wonder system, the system they took down after we showed it on the show. And then the P&I deaths are straight from the CDC mortality reporting system, right? Those are just the P&I deaths to date as of week 34. Now let's go to the next slide. All right, so now if we look at P&I deaths and we chart them against the COVID deaths that don't have influenza, which appears to be that now, again, these P&I deaths, these don't include the coronavirus deaths that had the influenza. Those got counted in the coronavirus column. Okay. So all that whole 93,000 derived value, those aren't represented here yet. All I'm showing you right now are the 74,000 people that don't have influenza and the P&I reporting. So this is P&I deaths. Okay, next slide. Now, these are your coronavirus deaths with influenza. These are your 93,000.
Doesn't have a double hump.
Well, it has a peak. It has a peak. Doesn't really have a double hump, correct? Okay, let's go to the next slide. But those are your 93,000 when they happen. Now, if I add those 93,000 deaths that had both H1N1 and coronavirus into the P&I number, and then look at the people that don't have influenza with coronavirus, now we see 330,000 deaths. This is your P&I number plus the people that have been reported to have both coronavirus and influenza. And I'm putting them into the P&I category versus the 74,000 people that died with coronavirus and other afflictions. And we'll talk about that in a second. There's comorbidity there with 2.6 others, and then we'll get to the 6%. Okay, next slide. All right, so this has been hiding in plain sight the whole time, but it's not in the download, and that makes it creepy. Now, the other aspect is the thing that Mel posted on Twitter and that the president retweeted is not on the main page. So the main page that we go to get the data is not the page where she found that 6% reference. To find the 6% reference, you have to go to this CDC site, which is the weekly updates by select demographics and genographic characteristics, which is like Hispanics and blacks and whites and women and men and ages and all that other stuff. Well, I never bothered to look at this, but thank God this woman, Mel Q, did. And In here, they're breaking down all the age groups and races and all this stuff, but halfway down the page, it explains the comorbidity, and you'll see the word comorbidity about halfway down the page. You just keep going.
There it is.
There you go. Right. So when you get to comorbidity, it says Table 3 shows the type of health conditions and contributing causes mentioned in conjunction with deaths involving coronavirus disease. And this is the part that the mainstream media lost their mind over. For 6% of the deaths, COVID-19 was the only cause mentioned. Okay? So for 6% of the deaths, COVID-19 is the only cause mentioned. For deaths with conditions or causes in addition to COVID-19, on average, there were 2.6 additional conditions or causes per death. The number of deaths with each condition or cause is shown for all deaths and by age groups for data on comorbidities. Okay. So I think that's just kind of factual. I don't think there's anything to derive out of that other than there's a certain percentage of the coronavirus deaths that coronavirus is the only thing it says. And then there's an average of 2.6 comorbidities on the remaining population. Is that your interpretation?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we know that of that comorbidity population, 93,000 people had a comorbidity that included influenza during an H1n1 outbreak. Okay. Safe to say, right? That's one of the 2.6, okay,
Right.
in 93,000 of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then other people, right? We know that people who have diabetes, people who have COPD,
Right, respiratory problems.
emphysema, yeah, if you've got emphysema, if you've had pulmonary embolisms before, if you frequently have had pneumonia, if you're some sort of immunocompromised, that's the other group, right?
Right.
But the pure nothing but COVID, according to the CDC, is 6%, right? So according to them, it's 6%. But this number that we have that shows 74,000 people that don't have influenza drives that derived value. So again, this has been hiding in plain sight, except when you hit the download button. And when you hit the download button, that column of numbers and that title aren't in the data. They don't send that to you. So every week when I'm downloading it, that's not there. And that's what I mean. It's like a magic trick. They put it on the screen. You might not notice it. I don't even bother looking at the screens because I get the downloads each week, right? So I just hit the update. I don't bother. And then I look at the screen and I see this and I'm like, oh my God, this is huge. They just cleaved the number for us. We now know 93,000 of the 167,000 people also had influenza, and most likely H1n1, because the symptoms that they've described these people dying from
they
are
match.
consistent.
Yeah, I mean, coronavirus symptoms, they've basically told us, are kind of identical to influenza symptoms.
And in particular, H1n1, which is particularly brutal. All right, so here's that paragraph that the president cited in his tweet that Mel Q tweeted. And again, I'm not going to interpret it. I'm just going to highlight it. And you guys read it. For 6% of the deaths, COVID-19 was the only cause mentioned. This is CDC. For deaths with conditions or causes in addition to COVID-19, on average, there were 2.6 additional conditions or causes per death. What you're not going to see on CBS, what you're not going to see on 60 Minutes, what you're not going to see on CNN is break it down. Show us the numbers. That's what you don't see on the mainstream media, right? Everybody jumps on this bandwagon. In fact, I think even Sean Hannity is retweeting this. Sean Hannity's hip to this now. So if Sean's on it, this might even be in the news tonight, guys. So let's go to the next slide and let's break down the data because we want evidence. Here's the data. This is the evidence according to the CDC. This is science. 74,000 people, according to them, died without influenza, leaving 93,000 that died with influenza. Let's go to the next slide. And there's the chart again. Okay.
Double
Now
hump.
let's keep going. Yep. All right, there's your 93,000. We add those back in now. Let's add these 93,000 that died with coronavirus. All right, now look at this. Hang on a second. The yellow chart shows the deaths reported as coronavirus, but they also had influenza. Look at the shape.
Yeah.
The double hump. So if that's the case, then is it more or less likely that if they had both, which one appears to be the killer? We talked about, does one of these viruses have a thumbprint? Does one of these viruses have a signature? And that takes us back to 1918. So these deaths that are reported as COVID-19, the pattern matches the influenza outbreak of this season, and it matches the influenza outbreak from 1918. The pattern does. So it's a comorbidity scenario. I'm not a medical examiner. I'm not a coroner. I can't tell you definitively what has happened here, but I'm pretty good at recognizing the double hump phenomenon.
Yeah.
All right, so then we go to the so the CDC mortality, right? So here's your 74,000. These are the people that do not have influenza, right? So let's go next slide. So this is your COVID-19 and maybe diabetes, COVID-19 and emphysema, right? We add it all together, and let's keep going. I think we saw this one already. Yeah, keep going. I think we saw this already too. Yeah, we did. Keep going. Yeah. All right. So this is, again, I think we looked at this one already. I don't know. It looks like we're going through. Okay. And this is what it looks like when we break it all down. All right. So this is, if we take the number that the CDC has given us and said, okay, 6% of the population has just COVID-19. That's the blue wedge. The remaining population has COVID-19. And of that, we know 74,000 did not have influenza, right? So of the 74,000 that don't have influenza, 10,000 have nothing. 10,000 people have just COVID, right? So 10,000 have just COVID.
It's these two wedges put together.
That's right. The 64,000 is the 74,000 number minus the 10,000 people, the 6%, that have just coronavirus. Coronavirus killed them. Now, the interesting thing there is that number, that 10,000 number that CBS Market Watch and Life Hacker, everybody's losing their minds. Washington Post are losing their minds over the 10,000. But the 10,000 number compares to Germany. It compares to China. It compares to, right? It compares favorably to Japan.
The number of COVID deaths in those countries, you mean?
Right. Remember, that was what was driving my cognitive dissonance, was how the hell there's only 1,500 people dead in Japan,
right,
and there's 4,500 dead in China and 8,000 in Germany, and we've got 180,000? Are we using the same rubric? Oh, maybe not. Maybe Johns Hopkins was behind the rubric. Because when we combine the P&I deaths with the COVID deaths with influenza, and we look at just the COVID deaths where it's the only cause of death, all right? Now, I'm not saying that COVID didn't kill those other 64,000 people that also have kidney failure and emphysema and whatever, right? The 64, if you want to see what the 6% looks like against our P&I deaths plus the COVID deaths that also had influenza, that's what the chart on this page is, and we are done.
Wow.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, is your P&I plus COVID and influenza compared to pure 6% of the COVID outbreak, just COVID. That's what it looks like on a chart, okay? And that is it. And then the final slide is my projection for when the United States will no longer have significant numbers. And that's about October 31st. By October
Oh.
31st, the depletion of susceptibles will have run out, meaning by election day, we will be at less than 100 people dying in America per week.
Your
Is
prediction based on the
my
data.
prediction. Right. And I would say that based on my reporting, my prediction is probably more accurate than any you've seen. All right. So I am predicting that on or about October 31st, we will be at about 100 people per week or fewer dying in the United States because we have achieved depletion of susceptibles.
So
Okay.
it'll be just in time for you to dress as Mohammed bin Salman for Halloween.
Who, interestingly, got a whole bunch of coverage on the cover of the New York Post. And the New York Post is reporting that they're now forcing the testing of influenza or coronavirus in New York. Fascinating. And Mohammed bin Salman was on there yesterday. They did a thing about him with his yachts and his planes and his villas. And they didn't mention that it was his birthday. And I thought that was weird. So they did a whole Mohammed bin Salman story on his birthday, not mentioning it was his birthday yesterday. So that's was weird.
Interesting. And
yeah.
weird.
So New York.
Look at
New York
Planned
orders.
Parenthood is advertising on the New York Post.
All right. So New York orders expanded testing to determine COVID and flu. So now the pressure's coming on. The DOJ is investigating what happened in the, in the nursing homes. And now New York is testing to make sure, was it flu or was it coronavirus? I think they've been caught. I think the DOJ has been watching the show. And they've been caught. And they were getting audited. New York says 33,000 people died from coronavirus. And again, we've got the data that says that more than 50% of them, most likely, according to the CDC, also had influenza. Right?
Amazing.
John, all right, let's wrap it up with this Mel Q post. So everybody wants to know Mel Q, was she right? The president, Twitter shut the president down. Twitter shuts her down. Was she right? Okay, let's go next page. Was she right? What do we got? Is there another slide after that? All right, zero hedge. Everybody's reporting on this, right? Okay, and then boom, boom. All right, everybody knows what's the story. I mean, I'm just giving you guys pieces of the pie. That's it, right? These are just pie charts. You figure that out for yourselves. That's it, right? That's where we're at.
Yeah, maybe I don't know. There seems to be
previous years
slides in there.
Yeah, those are your previous years. This is no double humps in the previous years. We didn't really have like this major H1n1 Spanish flu type outbreak in previous years. I told you I had that in the appendix. So that's it, guys. The double hump, 1918, a chart done in feather matches the pattern, the double hump pattern.
That's an amazing
the CDC.
Find. That's a smoking gun find, John.
Well, again, we'd have to ask an epidemiologist, right? Or they would say, man, maybe it's just a coincidence. It seems like it to me, but again, I don't know. But when I see the CDC telling us that 74,000 people did not have influenza, whoa. 93,000 of those people had influenza. 75,000, right? So to me, that's just a stunning admission. As stunning as the 6%. And so now we're starting to break it down. And now the truth is coming out. And so then it begs the question, why would the Johns Hopkins people make a map where everything is red, including countries where no one is dead, and tell you that 180,000 people are dead in the United States? Who would want to do that? Who would want you to think that the situation is worse than it is? And the question... And the question I guess I'm not allowed to ask, right? This question is, but it's just a question, right? So this is a question, it's hypothetical. The vaccine that we're working so furiously towards.
No, you can't question it. They don't want you even questioning it.
And I'm not. So I'm not questioning the vaccine. I think the vaccine is fabulous. I'm very excited for it. And I'll invest in whoever gets it. I'll invest in your stock. Okay.
Right.
But my question is just demand. Will demand for the vaccine be significant if we've achieved depletion of susceptibles? That's all. That's the question. Will demand for the vaccine be significant if we have achieved depletion of susceptibles.
I think if a boot is on your forehead and they're demanding that you get it, the demand will be there. But we're
that
going to have
takes
to
us to
see
your
what happens.
Dershowitz. That's your Dershowitz, and that was your huge break with Dershowitz. Was Dershowitz says they can put the boot on your throat.
I think
And
he
now
was
you
getting
know
us ready
why.
for that. I think Dershowitz has a role in the public. Like, why would he
I
talk to
think you're
me?
right.
Why would he waste his
I
time
think
coming
you're
on
right.
Crowdsource the Truth when he goes on Fox News and CNN? He's trying to spread a message.
And it was the type of message that it was like a bombshell message that if he
And he
drops it
wants
on
to
your show or
spread it
Alex
to,
Jones,
yes,
yes,
people who aren't watching the
yes,
mainstream news. He wants
yes, I
people to
agree.
know. That's why he came on the show.
I agree.
John, huge breakthrough today. I want to make sure that people know they can watch our weekly show on Fridays by going to patreon.com/IamJohnCullen or subscribestar.com/IamJohnCullen. And people can support Crowdsource the Truth by going to patreon.com/crowdsource the truth and subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth. John, it's fabulous research that you've been doing. I hope YouTube and Facebook and Periscope and all these others don't get angry at us and take action, because we're not questioning their data. We're bolstering their data. We're helping everybody see it. We're showing it to them and talking about it. And that's important.
And we could be wrong. I could certainly be wrong. I'm humble enough to know I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the facts. But the facts that I do have, I'm getting them from the CDC. And the fact that the World Health Organization stopped reporting on influenza, which we've also broken that story on the show, just makes this whole thing that much more strange. Why would the World Health Organization simultaneously not be reporting on H1N1 when Australia is in the midst of another outbreak? It makes no sense. So common sense needs to prevail. Common sense doesn't need to be old-fashioned. Common sense can be cool. And let's leave it at that.
Very well done, John. We'll see you on Friday for our regular show. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in early today to watch this episode. I'll be back in just a little while here with the Bishop Larry Gators. We're going to be going into some details of the Chadwick Boseman death and talking some more about Kobe Bryant. John, thanks for an excellent presentation. I hope that people will also subscribe to the John E. Hoover YouTube channel if you aren't already on there. It's a great way to keep up with John's work and to follow our weekly YouTube simulcasts. People have been watching us right now, this episode on the John E. Hoover YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. John, I'll see you on Friday. Be well until then, and thanks everybody for watching. Have a great morning.
Thank you, Jason.